My granddaughter told me I was too depressing to bring to Christmas. No hello, no apology. Just that, in a message, an hour before the dinner. I sat on the edge of my bed rereading it, trying to understand if I'd missed a joke. But there was no joke. Just a quiet cruelty wrapped in smiley faces. Grandma, we just think it might be a little much this year. You know? Emotionally, with Grandpa and all. You understand, right? We'll send you pics. Emotionally, as if my grief was a contagion. As if love for a dead man was something to hide from a holiday table. The sun had already begun to set outside my window, casting long, pale streaks across the snowy lawn. It was Christmas Eve. My wool skirt was already pressed. The cranberry sauce I made from scratch, just the way my late husband liked, was chilling in the fridge. My coat hung by the door, gloves folded inside the pockets. I'd been ready. I sat back down. Quiet. Still. The silence was sharp. At 78, a woman doesn't need explanations. She can read the space between words better than anyone. I understood perfectly. They hadn't decided this today. No one forgets to set a place at the table. They just didn't want me there. Too quiet. Too old. Too sad. I could almost hear Marla, my daughter-in-law, saying it. She brings the mood down. The kids don't know what to say. Can't she just stay home this year? My son would nod, maybe rub his temple, not agreeing exactly, but not objecting either. I had no intention of sitting in this house all night, like a pitiful ghost. I got up, took off the brooch I'd pinned on for the occasion, and put it back in the little blue box where it always lived. Then I reached for the one thing I hadn't worn in years, my winter boots. I pulled them on slowly, my joints creaking in protest. By 6 p.m., the streets were empty. The town had gone soft and glowy. Fairy lights, snowflakes, porch wreaths. I drove with both hands on the wheel, careful, deliberate. Not to church, not to the cemetery, but to a quiet brick building with a green sign out front. Walter M. Hanley, attorney at law. The receptionist looked up, startled. Mrs. Bennet? Yes, I said. I don't have an appointment, but I'd like to revise my will. She hesitated, eyes flicking to the festive garland over her desk. Tonight? Tonight, I said. Walter Hanley came out himself. He was older now, greyer, but his eyes were the same. Steady, alert. He'd handled my husband's affairs when Richard died. He knew the family, knew the shape of the cracks. Agnes, he said, offering his hand. Everything all right? No, I answered calmly, taking a seat. I'm tired of rewarding people for treating me like an obligation, and I'd like my will to reflect that. He nodded, not surprised. Not really. Let's get started. Walter opened a clean notepad and clicked his pen twice, a habit he probably didn't notice anymore. Let's start with what you'd like changed. I looked at the bookshelf behind him, the same one that held a photo of his late wife and a ceramic owl I gave him 15 years ago at tax season. I'd like to remove my son David as executor. Walter didn't blink. And the alternate? No alternate from the family. I want someone neutral. You, if you're willing. He gave a slow nod. Of course. And the grandchildren, I said, folding my gloves on my lap. I want to revoke any bequests made to Jason and Emily. I believe the original will left them college funds. Remove those. Walter didn't write immediately. He looked at me instead. The way someone looks when they're trying to measure not just what you're saying, but why you're saying it. Are you sure you want to make changes this large on Christmas Eve? I'm more sure now than I've ever been about anything, I replied. There's nothing seasonal about seeing people for who they are. He wrote quietly, with the care of someone used to messy grief. Would you like to redirect the funds elsewhere? Yes, I'd like to create a new trust. For Maddie. Walter glanced up. Your youngest granddaughter? She's the only one who speaks to me like I'm still a person. Still calls. Still visits. She brought me a pumpkin pie in October. Made it herself. That's a good enough reason, he said gently. And the house? Transfer to Maddie after my death. Full ownership. I've already paid off the mortgage. Walter scribbled a few notes. And personal effects? I'll sort those. I want it clear that the contents of this house aren't open to scavenging. No one walks through it like a yard sale when I'm gone. He smiled faintly. We'll make that clear. We worked in silence for a while. The overhead light buzzed faintly, and outside the window, snow began to gather against the sill. At one point, Walter paused. May I ask what prompted all this now? I didn't answer right away. I thought of Jason's text, of the silence that followed. I thought of the time I drove 2 hours to babysit while they went on a ski trip, only to be told not to mention their grandfather, because it made things awkward. Of the Christmas cards that said, "From the Thompsons," with no mention of Grandma. I got disinvited from Christmas, I said finally. By message, from my own granddaughter. Walter nodded slowly, as if he had been expecting something close to that. I'm sorry, Agnes. I'm not, I said. Not anymore. I was a mother. I was a wife. I was a grandmother. I was a business partner. I've been many things. But I'm still a woman, and I won't spend the last stretch of my life being tolerated. He slid a document toward me. This is a draft of the trust clause. I'll need to formalize it, but it gives you the general language. I read it carefully. Maddie Bennett, sole beneficiary, no stipulations, no conditions. Just one line. In recognition of love, freely given and never demanded. I looked up, and Walter met my eyes. I'll come back in after the holiday, I said, rising. We'll sign everything officially. Of course. He stood too, walked me to the door. The office was quiet now, the receptionist long gone. Outside, the parking lot was buried in a soft white hush. Agnes, Walter said as I opened the door, you did right. No, I said. I'm just doing what should have been done years ago. And I stepped out into the snow. I didn't sleep that night. Not for sorrow, not even for anger. But because my mind was busy stitching a tapestry out of memories I'd tried to fold away. Numbers, favors, checks, promises. Silence. By morning, I was at the kitchen table with a stack of old envelopes, scribbled notes, and my checkbook ledger dating back over 2 decades. I'd kept it all. Not for revenge, just for order, for remembering. The first entry that caught my eye was from 2006, tuition payment for Jason's private high school. $12,300. I remembered the phone call. It's such a good opportunity, Mum. He just doesn't do well in big classrooms. I'd sent the check that same day. Then there was Emily's semester abroad in Italy, $4,700. She's never asked for anything this big, Grandma. She's so passionate about art. I mailed that one with a note and a pair of wool socks. David's house down payment, $38,000. A temporary boost, he'd called it. We'll refinance in the spring and pay you right back. That was 12 springs ago. Marla's dental surgery. Toby's summer robotics camp. A new boiler when their old one went out. Groceries after David lost his job for 3 months. The SUV lease. The college application consultant. I sat back, my hands resting on my thighs. None of it had been coerced. I had given freely. But somewhere along the way, the giving became expected. The calls became quieter unless there was a problem to solve. And the thank yous, they stopped. I opened my laptop and logged into my online banking. The numbers weren't alarming. I'd always been frugal. and Richard's pension still came in monthly. But I saw the pattern now in full clarity: monthly auto payments to Jason's student loans, 250 sale, Emily's health insurance, 397, a family phone plan I didn't even use, and, this one made me wince, an automatic grocery transfer for David and Marla, 350, every month, like clockwork. I picked up the phone and dialed the bank. "Good morning, Miss Bennett," the woman said kindly. "How can I help you?" "I'd like to cancel all automatic transfers to family members, effective today." There was a pause. "All of them?" "Yes." "And would you like to revoke any account access permissions?" "Yes," I said. "My son David has viewing access. I'd like that revoked immediately." "Understood," she said gently. "Let me walk you through the security steps." As we worked, I felt something strange settle in my chest. Not glee, not bitterness, just a quiet kind of strength. The kind I used to feel when I closed the register at the bakery I ran with Richard, counted every dollar, locked the door, and turned the sign to closed. That kind of strength. When we finished, she read the summary back to me. I confirmed each point. At the end, she said, "Is there anything else I can help you with?" "No," I replied. "I think you've helped me quite enough already." I hung up and sat still for a moment, the kettle beginning to whistle on the stove. I got up, poured water over my tea, and returned to the table. The house was quiet, except for the ticking clock above the stove. I sipped the tea and looked at the ledger again. The numbers blurred a little. My eyes were tired, not from crying, just tired from waiting so long to act. The doorbell rang just after noon. I wasn't expecting anyone, but something told me who it might be before I even stood up. When I opened the door, there she was, Maddie, my youngest granddaughter. 24, freckled, messy brown hair in a loose ponytail, scarf looped 3 times around her neck like her mother never taught her how to dress properly. She looked flushed from the cold, carrying a small tin box in her gloved hands. "Hi, Grandma," she said, stepping in without waiting for an invitation. "I brought cookies, oatmeal raisin. I know they're not your favorite, but it's all I had ingredients for." I blinked. "You came?" "Of course I came. I saw Emily's post, the tree, the matching pajamas, the caption, 'Our little Christmas just the way we like it, stress-free.'" She rolled her eyes. "You weren't in any of the photos. I knew something was wrong." I motioned her inside. "You want tea?" "Always." She followed me into the kitchen, peeled off her coat, and sat down at the table like she had 100 times before. And she had. Unlike the others, Maddie never stopped visiting, even after college, even when it was inconvenient, even when all she could offer was herself. I poured us each a cup and sat down. The cookie tin sat unopened between us. "They told me I was too depressing," I said finally. She didn't ask who. She didn't need to. She stared into her cup. "God, I'm sorry. It's not your fault, darling. It's not my fault either. I should have said something sooner. I should have noticed how they were treating you." "They think they're sparing me," I said. "Or themselves, really. I've become a symbol. Of aging. Of grief. Of everything they want to avoid." Maddie looked up. Her eyes were wet, but her voice stayed level. "They're cowards." I gave a small smile. "Perhaps. But I've stopped hoping they'll change." She hesitated, then reached across the table and took my hand. "What can I do?" "You're already doing it." We drank in silence for a few minutes. It wasn't uncomfortable. Maddie had never needed noise to fill the space between us. After a while, she asked, "Do you need help with anything? Errands? Groceries? I can drive you somewhere if—" I went to see Walter Hanley yesterday. She blinked. The lawyer? Yes. She waited. I watched her as I said it. I changed my will. Maddie's expression didn't shift much, but I saw the understanding register behind her eyes, the depth of it. She wasn't stupid. I removed the others, and I created a trust. For you. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. Grandma, I didn't ask for that. That's not why I came. I know. I don't need... I know. She sat back, breathing carefully. You don't have to buy my love. That's why you're getting it, I said softly. Her eyes filled again. She shook her head, as if trying to clear the emotion from it. You're going to get a lot of phone calls when they find out. I expect so. Do you want me to help you screen them? I smiled. No, love. I want you to help me bake something rich, something absurdly indulgent. Because for the first time in years, I'm not funding guilt, I'm baking for joy. Maddie grinned through tears. Chocolate bourbon cake? Exactly that. And we got up. By the time the cake was cooling on the rack, the messages had already started. The first came from David, a single line. Hey Mum, just saw a weird alert from the bank. Did something happen? I didn't respond. Then Marla. Edith, we're getting error messages trying to process the phone bill. Can you check your account? And a minute later. Also, did you cancel Jason's loan payment? That's due today. I turned the phone face down and rinsed the mixing bowls in the sink. Maddie sat at the table peeling an orange, watching me with a look I couldn't quite read. She didn't say anything until I dried my hands and sat down across from her. Want me to handle the fallout? She asked. No, I said. They know how to dial numbers. They can dial mine. They did. The phone rang twice before I picked up. David's voice, tight with something he tried to mask as concern. Mum, there's something wrong with the accounts. No, I said. There isn't. A pause. What do you mean? I cancelled the transfers, the auto payments, the access. He went silent. I could hear him swallowing on the other end. Is this because of Christmas? He asked finally. Because of Emily's message? It's not just because of Christmas, I said evenly. It's because of years, of what you've chosen to see and not see, of what I've enabled. Jesus, Mum, couldn't we have talked about this first? We're talking now. Another pause. Then, incredulous, you cancelled Jason's loan payment. Yes. He's counting on that. Maybe he should count on himself. There was a sharp exhale through the line. This is so unlike you. No, I said. This is exactly like me. The part of me you've forgotten exists. More silence, then low and cutting. So what now? You're going to punish all of us because you're feeling hurt? I'm not punishing anyone, I said. I'm simply stopping the reward. He scoffed. You know what? Marla was right. This is exactly the kind of stunt you'd pull. All drama and no conversation. I tried conversations, David. They were met with condescension, or silence, or forwarded to voicemail. Okay, he snapped. You made your point. I hope it keeps you warm at night. It will, I said. It already has. I hung up. The silence in the kitchen was heavy, but not uncomfortable. Maddie pushed a plate toward me, a warm piece of cake. Want to eat it before the frosting goes on? She asked. I nodded, picked up a fork, and took a bite. It tasted like cocoa and bourbon and something sweeter underneath, something like freedom. He showed up the next morning. I saw his car through the curtains, David's black sedan, parked haphazardly against the curb, hazard lights blinking. He didn't knock right away. Just sat there for a minute, probably rehearsing his lines, trying to decide which version of himself to bring to the door. When he did knock, it was 3 sharp raps. No doorbell. As if formality had already been abandoned. I opened the door and stepped aside. "Come in." He walked in, not with the steps of a son visiting his mother, but with the gait of a man arriving to fix something that had come loose. The moment he entered the living room and saw the bank folders on the table, he sighed audibly. "So, it's not just temporary." "No. You really did it?" "Yes." He stood for a moment, taking in the quiet, the smell of coffee, the cake tin on the counter. "Jesus, Mom." "You've said that already." He looked older than I remembered, or maybe just more tired. His coat was unzipped, scarf askew. He hadn't shaved, but his tone was rehearsed, still clipped, still defensive. "You should have talked to me." "I'm talking now." "That's not what I mean." He moved toward the table but didn't sit. "You blindsided us. Jason's loan payment bounced. Emily's insurance got declined. Do you have any idea—" "Yes," I said. "I do. I read every single transaction before I cancelled them. I know exactly what you've come to rely on." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I waited. Finally, he sat. "This isn't just about money, is it?" I said nothing. David exhaled, rubbed his face. "You think we don't care about you?" "I think," I said slowly, "that you care more about what I provide than who I am." "That's not true." "Isn't it?" He looked away. "It's complicated." "It doesn't have to be." He tapped a finger against the table. "You feel unappreciated." "Fine, that's fair. We could have done better. But you don't fix that by pulling the rug out from under everyone." I looked at him. Really looked. My son, once so gentle. A boy who cried when he found a dead bird in the backyard. A man who now could stare his mother in the eye and still reach for justifications. "David," I said, "do you remember your last birthday?" He blinked. "What? Did you invite me?" He was silent. "Did you even call me?" Still nothing. "Do you know the last time Emily visited me? Or Jason? Or Marla, for that matter?" His jaw tightened. "I sat here," I said softly. "In this house you all grew up in, and waited. For someone to remember that I was more than an ATM. More than a place to send thank you cards once a year." He looked up then. "Mum, No. Let me finish. Because you're not here to listen. You're here to get things back to how they were. But that life is over. The one where I fund your silence." David stood. "So that's it? You're cutting us off?" "I'm setting myself free." He laughed once, bitterly. "You think Maddie's going to take care of you now? That's your plan?" "No," I said, standing too. "My plan is to take care of myself. Something I've done since long before any of you knew how to spell your names." He walked toward the door, then turned. "You're going to regret this." "Possibly," I said. "But not today." And I closed the door behind him. That afternoon, the phone rang relentlessly. Each call was a fresh wave of tension crashing against the fragile peace I had just begun to claim. I let most go to voicemail, but one I answered. Marla's voice, tight and clipped. "Agnes, you have to reconsider," she said, urgency prickling through her words. "This isn't how families operate. You're isolating yourself." "I'm not isolating," I replied steadily. "I'm reclaiming." "There are better ways to handle this," she insisted. "You don't have to make such a public statement. We can talk. Work through things." "I've talked. Enough for a lifetime." I could hear her inhale sharply. "Marla, I won't be bullied into silence or pity." There was a pause, then a quieter voice. "Your children are worried about you." "I'm fine. Stronger than I've been in years." She sighed. You're making it harder for everyone. And I'm making it easier for myself. I hung up and sat down, hands trembling just a little. The phone buzzed again. Jason this time. I let it ring out. That evening, I found myself staring at the framed photo of Richard on the mantelpiece. His kind eyes looked back at me, steady and calm. What would he say? Would he understand this choice I had made? I took a deep breath and dialed an old friend's number. Miriam, a woman whose wisdom had quietly guided me through many storms. Agnes. Her voice was warm and familiar. I was just thinking about you. I needed to hear that, I admitted. We talked for hours, not about the pain or the betrayal, but about strength and boundaries, about self-respect and rebirth. Miriam reminded me that sometimes the hardest thing is saying no, not just to others, but to ourselves when we're afraid of being alone. After we hung up, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The next morning, Maddie came over again, this time bringing a stack of letters she'd found tucked away in a drawer. Notes from her parents, her aunts and uncles, letters I'd written over the years, always signed with love and encouragement. "Have you read these?" she asked. I shook my head. "They're full of excuses, Agnes, but also regrets. Maybe there's a way back." I smiled faintly. Maybe, but on my terms. The day wore on with more calls and messages, but I was no longer frightened. Instead, I found myself embracing a new rhythm, one where I chose when and how to give, where my voice mattered. That evening, I sat by the window, watching the sky deepen from gold to navy. The wind carried the scent of pine and smoke from nearby chimneys. I picked up my pen and wrote a letter, not to my family but to myself. An affirmation, a promise, a quiet declaration. I am worthy. I am strong. I am more than their expectations. And as I sealed the envelope, I felt something shift inside me, a calm certainty that whatever came next, I would meet it on my own terms. Tomorrow, I would visit Walter again. There were more papers to sign, more boundaries to set. But for tonight, I would rest in this newfound freedom. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains as I prepared for my visit to Walter's office. The winter air was crisp, the kind that makes your breath hang like tiny clouds before fading away. I wrapped my scarf tight around my neck and pulled on my gloves. Today wasn't just a day for signing papers. It was a day for setting things in stone. Walter greeted me with his usual calm presence, though I noticed a flicker of something, perhaps admiration or quiet respect, in his eyes. "You've made quite the statement, Agnes," he said, handing me a fresh stack of documents. "This trust and will revision, it's more than legal, it's personal." I nodded, feeling the weight of those words settle over me like a mantle. It is, and it's overdue. We spent the next hour going through the fine print, clause by clause. Walter explained each adjustment patiently, answering my questions without hurry or judgment. The trust designated Maddie as sole beneficiary, with clear instructions protecting the estate from any claims or disputes. The will reflected my wishes with unmistakable clarity, no bequests to those who had chosen to exclude me in life. "Have you considered informing your family about these changes?" Walter asked gently. I smiled, a little wryly. "They'll find out soon enough." He laughed softly. "Indeed." After the signing, I stepped outside into the sharp winter sun, feeling lighter somehow. It was as if the act of taking control had unburdened me from years of quiet pain. Walking home, I passed the little park where Richard and I had taken the children for picnics. The benches were dusted with snow, and the trees stood bare against the pale sky. I stopped for a moment, closing my eyes and breathing in the cold air. Somewhere in the distance, children's laughter echoed faintly, hopeful and untamed. At home, I set the papers carefully on the kitchen table, next to the cooling chocolate cake Maddie and I had baked. I picked up my phone to check messages. There were more calls and texts, most unanswered, some angry, others pleading. But I didn't feel the urge to respond. Not yet. Instead, I opened a book I'd been meaning to read for months, but never found the time. The words pulled me into another world, and for a while, I forgot the ache that lingered beneath the surface. Later, Maddie arrived with her usual warmth and a basket of fresh fruit. We sat together, talking quietly about everything and nothing. She told me about her work at the community centre and her plans to volunteer during the holidays. "I'm proud of you, Grandma," she said, her eyes shining with sincerity. "And I'm proud of you," I replied. That night, as I lay in bed, the house was still and peaceful. For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of contentment, not from the approval of others, but from the quiet knowledge that I was standing on my own. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, no doubt. No. But tonight, I rested in the calm certainty that I had reclaimed my life and my dignity. The days that followed felt strangely light, as if the weight I'd carried for so long was finally lifting, inch by inch. I spent mornings sipping tea by the window, watching the world blur softly behind frosted glass. The town went about its usual rhythms, indifferent to the storms in my heart. And that was fine. I was learning to be indifferent too. Maddie stopped by almost every day now, her presence a warm balm to the quiet house. We baked, talked, and sometimes just sat together in comfortable silence. She never asked about the calls, or the anger, or the family's plans. She understood without words. One afternoon, as I was watering the small collection of poinsettias on the windowsill, the phone rang. It was an unknown number. I hesitated before answering, unsure if I wanted to open the door to another confrontation. "Mrs. Bennet?" a woman's voice asked cautiously. "Yes, speaking." "I'm Sarah Caldwell. I manage the community centre where Maddie volunteers." "Oh," I said, surprised. "How can I help you?" "I just wanted to say that Maddie speaks very highly of you. She told us about the cake you made for the holiday fundraiser and how much the kids enjoyed it." I smiled softly. "That's kind of her to say." Sarah's voice grew a little warmer. "I know things have been difficult lately. If there's anything we can do to support you, please don't hesitate to ask. Maddie is a remarkable young woman." "Thank you, Sarah," I said sincerely. "That means a lot." After hanging up, I felt a surge of gratitude I hadn't expected. It wasn't about the cake or the fundraiser. It was about being seen, acknowledged, connected. Something I'd lost somewhere along the way. That evening, Maddie and I decided to visit the centre together. The air was crisp and smelled faintly of pine and smoke. Inside, the warmth and laughter were immediate, a welcome contrast to the cold isolation I'd felt so often. Children ran past us, clutching art supplies and holiday decorations. Volunteers bustled about, smiles wide and genuine. Maddie introduced me to a few people, and I felt the simple joy of belonging. As we left, Maddie squeezed my hand. "See? You're part of something." I nodded. I'm beginning to believe that. Back at home, I pulled out a photo album, the one filled with pictures of Richard, the children's birthdays, family vacations long past. I traced a finger over the smiling faces, remembering a time when love felt simpler, easier. Somewhere deep inside, I felt the stirrings of hope, a quiet promise that maybe, just maybe, this chapter could end differently. Later that night, I drafted a letter. Not to my family, not yet, but to myself. "Dear Agnes," it began, You are stronger than you think. You are worthy of love without conditions. This is your time. I folded the letter and placed it in the blue box where the brooch lived. Tomorrow I would face whatever came next. But tonight I allowed myself to simply be. And in that moment, I was enough. The day of the family dinner arrived with a grey sky and a chill that seeped into the bones. I dressed carefully, choosing the navy blue dress I had worn to Richard's funeral years ago, the one that still fit despite time's slow march. I pinned on the pearl necklace Richard had given me for our 30th anniversary and slipped into low-heeled shoes polished to a soft shine. I considered my reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at me was older, yes, but there was a quiet fire in her eyes, a resilience that had been forged in decades of hardship and love. She was not the woman who would sit quietly at home while others celebrated without her. I called a cab, and the driver greeted me with a warm smile, commenting on the cold evening. I told him the address and asked to be dropped a few blocks from the restaurant. I wanted to arrive unnoticed, to see for myself. Willow Creek was the most prestigious restaurant in town, its red brick facade softened by creeping ivy and a canopy of twinkling lights. The parking lot was nearly full, and I recognized several cars: Wesley's silver Lexus, Thelma's red Ford, and Reed's battered Honda. They were all there, everyone but me. I lingered in the shadows near the entrance, watching through the windows. Inside, the room was bright and warm. The family sat around a large round table, the center of their world, where laughter and clinking glasses filled the air. Wesley sat at the head, his smile wide, holding his wife Cora's hand. Thelma and her husband were chatting animatedly. Reed and his girlfriend Audrey exchanged glances across the table, and friends I didn't know mingled nearby. The sight hit me like a cold slap. They were celebrating 30 years of marriage, 30 years, and I was not invited. A tear slid down my cheek, but I brushed it away angrily. This was not the time for tears. It was time for decisions. I noticed Reed looking around, as if searching for someone. Audrey shook her head gently when he asked, her eyes filled with concern. The waiter brought out a massive seafood platter, followed by an elaborate meat dish. Bottles of expensive wine were uncorked, the rich aroma filling the room. I saw Cora laughing, her face radiant and free of the illness she'd once claimed confined her to bed. Thelma raised a glass, joining the toast as everyone applauded. Wesley put his arm around Cora, and they kissed, a perfect picture of happiness. I took a step back, heart aching. But then I heard a voice behind me, firm and kind. "Mrs. Thornbury?" I turned to see a tall man with a neatly trimmed grey beard and sharp eyes. Lewis Quinland, the restaurant's owner and a childhood friend. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said gently. "I didn't expect to come," I admitted. He smiled softly. "Well, you shouldn't be standing outside. You're family. The guest of honor's mother." I hesitated, then nodded. Lewis took my hand. "Let me show you in." Together, we walked toward the grand doors, the laughter and music spilling out to greet us. As I stepped inside, I felt something shift. Not anger or shame, but a quiet strength, a presence that commanded respect. Tonight, I was not invisible. Tonight, I belonged. And no one could take that away from me. Inside the grand hall, the atmosphere was charged with celebration, laughter, music, the clinking of glasses. Yet beneath the surface, an undercurrent of tension hummed quietly, like a distant storm. I could feel the eyes of the guests as we entered, some curious, some shocked, others uncomfortable. Lewis guided me to the center of the room, where the family sat frozen in surprise. Wesley's smile faltered, Cora's face paled, and Thelma's eyes darted nervously. Reed, sitting beside Audrey, shifted uncomfortably. "Mother," Wesley finally managed, his voice strained. I met his gaze calmly. "Son." The room was silent, except for the soft music playing in the background. "I wasn't invited," I said plainly, "so I came anyway." A ripple of murmurs spread among the guests. Wesley's jaw tightened. "This isn't the place." "It's exactly the place," I interrupted. "For too long I was made invisible in this family. Silent, sidelined, tolerated. But tonight, I am here." Cora looked away, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Thelma shifted in her seat, avoiding my eyes. I looked around at the faces I once called family, now strangers at a table that was never meant for me. Lewis stepped forward, his voice clear and steady. "Mrs. Thornbury, as the mother of the guest of honor, you deserve to be here. This celebration is incomplete without you." The guests nodded, some murmuring their agreement. Wesley finally stood, a flush rising to his cheeks. "Mum, I'm sorry." I held up a hand. "Don't apologize yet. We have a lot to talk about." I glanced at Maddie, who had slipped quietly into the room behind me. She smiled encouragingly. I took a deep breath and addressed the room. For years, I gave freely, my love, my time, my resources, hoping it would be enough. But love isn't a ledger. It's not a transaction. Jason shifted uncomfortably. "I am here not to accuse, but to reclaim," I continued. "To remind us all that family is more than appearances and obligations. It's about respect, kindness, and presence." Tears welled in Cora's eyes as she reached out to squeeze Wesley's hand. "I'm tired of being an afterthought," I said quietly, "of being the shadow no one wants to face. Tonight, I stand in the light." The room was silent for a moment, then applause began, soft at first, then growing stronger. Lewis smiled warmly. "Let's raise a glass, not just to 30 years of marriage, but to the strength of family in all its forms." Maddie raised her glass beside me. I followed suit. As we toasted, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: belonging. Not because they had finally included me, but because I had taken my place. Later, when the night wound down and the guests began to leave, Wesley approached me quietly. "Mum, I want to do better. I want to make this right." I nodded, holding his gaze. "It starts with honesty." We embraced, the years of distance shrinking in that moment. Outside, the cold air bit gently, but inside, I carried a warmth that no winter could quell. Tonight was a beginning, and for the first time in a long time, I looked forward to what came next. After the family dinner, life settled into a new rhythm, not without challenges, but with an unmistakable clarity. I continued to meet with Walter Hanley to finalize the legal arrangements. The trust was now fully established, with Maddie as the sole beneficiary, and all the necessary paperwork signed and securely stored. The house would pass to her, along with clear instructions to protect my legacy from any future disputes. Walter was more than just my attorney. He had become a quiet ally in this journey. One afternoon, as we reviewed the final documents, he looked up and said, "Agnes, you've taken control of your story in a way many never manage." I smiled, feeling the truth of his words. It's never too late. Back at home, Maddie and I worked on projects that brought me joy: baking, volunteering at the community centre, even planting a small winter garden of hardy herbs and flowers. For the first time in years, I felt the lightness of living on my own terms. The phone calls from my family became less frequent, some more tentative than before. I chose when to answer, when to listen, and when to protect my peace. It was a delicate balance. but one I was learning to navigate. One day, Maddie brought over a letter from Jason. He had written to apologize for his part in the distance that had grown between us, expressing a desire to rebuild our relationship. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a special box labeled New Beginnings. Not all wounds healed overnight, but the act of acknowledging them was a start. As the new year approached, I found myself reflecting on the past and the future. The pain of rejection still lingered, but it no longer defined me. One crisp morning, I met with Maddie at the community centre to help prepare for a holiday fundraiser. Surrounded by laughter and purpose, I felt connected to life, to others, to myself. Later, in the quiet of my home, I wrote a journal entry. Today, I am free. Free from silence that suffocates. Free from giving until there's nothing left. Free to love without conditions. I closed the journal and looked around my home, a sanctuary of memories and hopes. And I knew that no matter what the future held, I had reclaimed my dignity and my voice. Because sometimes, the greatest act of love is choosing yourself. And that was a gift I would carry always. The news spread quickly. My revisions to the will, the trust set up for Maddie, the freezing of payments, all of it like a stone cast into the still waters of family life. The ripples were immediate and fierce. David's calls grew more frequent, his tone shifting from defensive to desperate. Marla's messages pleaded for peace, for understanding, for a chance to make things right. But the harder they pushed, the more resolute I became. One afternoon, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find my daughter-in-law, Marla, standing there, a mixture of frustration and vulnerability in her eyes. "We need to talk," she said, stepping inside before I could respond. I closed the door behind her and gestured to the living room. We sat, the silence thick between us. "Agnes," she began, voice low, "this has become a family crisis. You're hurting us all." "I'm hurting because I was invisible for so long," I said calmly, "because I was a means to an end, not a person." She sighed, eyes glistening. "We never wanted it to come to this. We thought you'd understand, that this was just a phase." "A phase that lasted decades," I replied. She looked away. "I'm sorry." "It's a start," I said. The conversation was tense but honest. We laid bare years of misunderstandings, resentments, and unspoken expectations. For the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine remorse in her. David arrived shortly after, his face pale and drawn. He sat across from me, hesitant. "Mom," he began, voice breaking, "I've been selfish. I didn't see how much you gave, how much you sacrificed." I nodded slowly. "And now? I want to make amends, not just words, but actions. I want us to heal." It was a fragile hope, but a hope nonetheless. Yet not everyone was ready. My other children remained distant, their responses cold or silent. Family gatherings became battlegrounds of unspoken tension, polite smiles masking simmering discord. One evening, Marla called me, voice trembling. "They're angry about the changes. They say you've betrayed us." "I did what I had to do to protect myself," I said firmly. "We fear losing you." I took a deep breath. "You haven't lost me, but you lost the right to take me for granted." The weeks turned into months. Slowly, some bridges began to rebuild, others remained scorched. Through it all, Maddie was my anchor. Her unwavering love and support were the light that guided me through the storm. One afternoon, as we planted spring bulbs in the garden, she looked up at me. "Grandma," she said softly, "you've taught me what it means to stand up for yourself, to value your own worth." I smiled, wiping dirt from my hands. "And you've reminded me how to love without losing myself." The journey was far from over. Family was complicated, woven with love and pain, joy and disappointment. But I had found my voice, my dignity, and my peace, and that was more than enough. As I closed the garden gate behind us, I felt the weight of the past lift, replaced by a quiet strength. This was my story now, one of courage, resilience, and love that began with honoring myself. No matter what came next, I would face it with an open heart and steady soul. The letter came unexpectedly. A simple envelope, cream-coloured, without any flourish, addressed in a familiar hand. I found it on my kitchen table one morning, resting atop the stack of unopened mail. I hesitated before opening it, as if breaking the seal might unravel more than paper and ink. Inside was a single sheet, written in careful, deliberate script. Dear Agnes, I have read your letter, and I want you to know I hear you. More than that, I understand. For too long I was blind to the sacrifices you made, to the love you gave that went unnoticed. I was caught up in my own world, my own struggles and fears. I am sorry. I cannot promise everything will be fixed overnight, but I want to try. For you. For us. With love, David. Tears blurred my vision as I folded the letter carefully. It was not a perfect resolution, but it was a beginning. I placed the letter in my blue box, where I kept the brooch, the old photographs, and other tokens of a life well lived. That afternoon, Maddie came by with a warm smile and a basket of fresh fruit. "Grandma, I have something for you," she said, handing me a small envelope. Inside was a photo, David, Marla, and the children, standing on the porch of my house, smiles genuine and unguarded. "We're coming for dinner next week," Maddie said softly. "They want to make things right." I looked at the photo and smiled, a smile tinged with cautious hope. Over the next days, I prepared for their visit. I cleaned the house not out of obligation, but out of a desire to welcome them, to open the door not just to my home, but to a new chapter. When they arrived, the air was thick with tentative warmth and unspoken apologies. We shared a meal, laughter tentative but growing, stories old and new, weaving a fragile tapestry of family. It was not perfect. There were missteps, silences, and moments of pain. But there was also presence, and for the first time in years, I felt seen. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I reflected on the journey, the losses, the gains, the strength found in setting boundaries and demanding respect. I reached for my journal and wrote, "Family is not always blood. It is the care we choose to give and receive. I am no longer invisible. I am enough." The morning sun spilled through the curtains, bathing the room in soft light. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, ready to face whatever came next, with a heart open and a spirit unbroken. For this was my story, a story of love, loss, and the quiet power of standing tall. And it was far from over. The morning after the family dinner felt different, quieter, but charged with a subtle promise. The weight of years pressing down on me had begun to lift, replaced by a calm determination that I hadn't known I still possessed. I woke early, the house still wrapped in the soft hush of dawn. I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the first light spill over the rooftops, painting the world in gold and shadow. The day stretched ahead, full of possibility. In the solitude, I allowed myself to reflect, not on the past grievances, the silences, or the hurt, but on the quiet victories, the courage it took to say no, the strength to set boundaries, the clarity that came from choosing myself. I thought of Maddie, her steady presence like a beacon in the storm, of Walter Hanley, whose calm guidance had helped me reclaim control over my life and legacy, of the conversations with my son and daughter-in-law, the beginnings of understanding, however tentative. And I realized this was not an end, but a beginning. With deliberate care, I pulled out my journal and pen, the familiar tools of a lifelong storyteller. My handwriting was steady, the words clear. To those who feel unseen, unheard, or undervalued, you are not alone. There comes a time when the weight of others' expectations must be lifted, when silence must be broken, when love for oneself must be louder than the noise of rejection. This is your moment. Stand tall. Speak your truth. Choose your dignity. I paused, watching the steam curl from my tea, the sunlight dancing on the pages. The phone lay silent beside me. No urgent calls, no demanding messages. For once, the world could wait. Later, I walked through the house, touching the worn wooden banister, the faded wallpaper that held memories of laughter and tears. I paused before a photograph of Richard and me on our wedding day. Young, hopeful, full of dreams.